I want to be upfront about something before I start. I am not a vindictive person by nature. I'm a 38-year-old software engineer. I live alone. I keep a tidy yard. I wave at people I pass on the street. And for the first 35 years of my life, I had never been in a serious conflict with anyone. I am, by most measurable standards, a low-drama individual. Then I bought the house on Crestfield Lane in Tucson, Arizona, and I met my neighbor, Dale. I'll tell you how it started, because the beginning matters. It always matters with these things. The beginning tells you what kind of person you're dealing with. I moved in on a Saturday in March. I had a small moving truck, a friend named Phil who had agreed to help me in exchange for pizza, and a moderate amount of optimism about homeownership that would be fully depleted within about 72 hours. The house was a modest 3-bedroom on a quiet street, and my lot shared a fence line with the property to my right, which belonged to Dale. I met Dale that first afternoon. He walked over while Phil and I were carrying boxes and introduced himself with the particular energy of someone who has already decided they don't like you. Smile that doesn't reach the eyes, handshake that lasts a half second too long, the way he looked at my moving truck like it was personally offensive to him. He was maybe 55, heavyset, with the deeply tanned skin of someone who spends a lot of time outdoors, and the bearing of a man who considers himself the unofficial authority on his street. He welcomed me to the neighborhood. Then, in the same breath, he told me that the previous owner had let things go on my side of the fence, and that he hoped I planned to maintain the property to a reasonable standard. He said this while looking at my lawn, which was slightly overgrown after sitting vacant for 2 months during escrow. I told him I appreciated the heads up and that I'd get to the lawn that week. He nodded as if I'd said something barely acceptable and went back to his yard. Phil looked at me. I looked at Phil. Neither of us said anything. I mowed the lawn the following Tuesday. It looked fine. Not Dale approved, apparently, because 2 days later, I found a handwritten note in my mailbox. Not my door, my actual mailbox slipped inside, informing me that my trash cans were placed too close to the shared property line on collection day, which he claimed was a violation of the HOA rules. I checked the HOA rules. There was no such specification. I moved the cans anyway, because I was new and I wanted peace. That was my first mistake. Not the moving of the cans, that was fine. My mistake was the lesson I accidentally taught Dale in that moment, that notes in the mailbox got results. Over the following 6 months, the notes escalated. He left one because my outdoor lights were too bright and allegedly shone into his bedroom window. My lights faced my own front door and were pointed downward. He left one because a tree on my property had dropped leaves onto his driveway. It was autumn in Arizona, which admittedly is mild, but still. He left one because he had observed my car leaking oil in my own driveway and was concerned about property values. I bought an oil catch pan and put it under my car. The car had leaked maybe 2 tablespoons of oil. I tried talking to him twice. Both conversations went the same way. He was polite enough on the surface, agreed that yes, of course, neighbors should get along, and then within a week there would be another note. I went to the HOA about it, and the HOA rep, a tired woman named Sandra who had clearly dealt with Dale before, told me off the record that he had filed formal complaints against 3 previous neighbors, and the best strategy was to document everything and trying not to engage. I started documenting. In month 7, Dale escalated in a way that moved things from annoying to genuinely disruptive. He began parking his truck, a large lifted F-250, directly in front of my house. Not in front of his own house, mine. Every single day. Now, parking on a public street is legal, and I knew that, and he knew that I knew that. But the effect was that my house number was blocked from the street. Delivery drivers consistently drove past my address, and the visual from my front window was a wall of gray pickup truck. It was petty in the most deliberate, calculated way, and we both understood exactly what it was. He also, and I only found this out later, began telling other neighbors that I had complained about him to the HOA, which was technically true, but which he framed in a way designed to make me look like a troublemaker. I started noticing that the couple 3 houses down, who had been friendly in the early weeks, were suddenly a lot less warm when we passed each other on walks. That winter, I had a contractor come out to give me a quote on redoing my backyard patio. Dale called the city on me within 48 hours, claiming I was doing unpermitted construction. I was getting a quote. The contractor had not done a single thing. The city inspector who came out was apologetic and clearly irritated at having his time wasted. That was the moment I decided I was done trying to coexist with Dale. I want to be clear about my mindset at this point. I was not angry in a hot, reactive way. I had moved past that somewhere around month 9. What I felt instead was something colder and more methodical, a kind of engineer's interest in the problem. Dale was a bully who had learned over many years that low-level harassment was consequence-free because none of it rose to the level of police involvement, and most people eventually either moved or gave up. He had never encountered someone with the patience, the documentation habits, and the particular skill set to make that calculus stop working for him. I spent 2 weeks just researching. I am, professionally, someone who is very good at finding information and identifying systems and understanding how things connect to each other. I turned those skills on Dale. What I found was instructive. Dale ran a small landscaping business, 3 trucks, maybe 6 or 7 employees, operating under the name Desert Sun Landscaping. He had an active business license, a contractor's license for irrigation work, and a decent enough reputation on Google with about 40 reviews averaging 4.1 stars. He had lived in the neighborhood 11 years. He owned his home outright, no mortgage, bought it in 2009 for well under market value during the crash. His wife had left him in 2019, and there had been a fairly public divorce, details of which were in the court records, which are public. Among the things in those court records was a declaration from his ex-wife, relevant to asset disclosure proceedings, in which she stated that Dale regularly accepted cash payments for his landscaping business and did not always report them. I noted that. I also discovered, through the county assessor's website, that Dale had a small storage facility on a piece of land outside the city that he had not disclosed in the divorce proceedings as a marital asset. That was in the divorce records too, buried in a filing from his ex-wife's attorney. Apparently it had been contested. Apparently it had been unresolved. I noted that too. I also spent some time on the Arizona Registrar of Contractors website, which maintains a public database of licensed contractors and any complaints filed against them. Dale had 2 prior complaints on record, both resolved, both from several years ago, related to irrigation work not completed to specification. Interesting background, but not immediately useful. What was useful was this. Through a local community Facebook group, I found 3 separate people who had posted about bad experiences with Desert Sun Landscaping. In each case, the poster had mentioned wanting to file a complaint but not knowing where to go. 2 of them had mentioned specific issues that, if true, constituted violations of Arizona contractor licensing standards. I messaged all 3 of them privately. I introduced myself as a neighbor of Dale's who had been researching the complaint process and wanted to share information. I sent each of them the direct link to the Arizona Registrar of Contractors complaint portal, along with a brief explanation of how to document their complaint effectively for maximum impact. I did not tell them what to say. I did not fabricate anything. I simply made it easier for people with legitimate grievances to act on them. All 3 filed complaints within 2 weeks. Simultaneously, I did something that felt almost too simple. I called the IRS tip line. This is a real thing that exists. The IRS has a system, Form 3949A, for reporting suspected tax fraud. It's anonymous. I reported what I had found in the public court documents about Dale's cash payment practices. I noted the discrepancy in the divorce asset disclosure. I submitted it and forgot about it because IRS investigations move at their own pace, and I wasn't counting on it for anything. Then I turned to Dale's parking situation. He was still parking in front of my house every day. I had already tried the city's non-emergency line about it and, as I expected, been told there was nothing they could do since it was a public street. But I'm persistent, and I kept digging, and what I eventually found was a city ordinance that prohibited any vehicle from being parked in the same spot on a residential street for more than 72 continuous hours. The ordinance was real and enforceable. It just required someone to call it in, provide documentation that the vehicle had not moved, and specifically request enforcement rather than a general complaint. I bought a cheap motion-detecting outdoor camera that covered the street in front of my house. I documented Dale's truck sitting in that spot uninterrupted for 6 days. Then I called the city, cited the specific ordinance by number, provided my photo documentation, and requested a formal enforcement action rather than an informal response. His truck was ticketed twice and towed once within the following 3 weeks. After the tow, Dale came to my door for the first time since I'd moved in. I should describe his face because it was instructive. He wasn't exactly furious, or rather, he was furious underneath a performance of reasonableness that he clearly thought was convincing. He told me I knew I'd called the city about his truck. I told him I didn't know what he was referring to, but that I had indeed called the city about a parking ordinance I'd found, because I like to understand the rules that apply to my neighborhood. He stood there for a moment. Then he told me I should be careful of being a troublemaker. I said, in the most pleasant and even voice I could manage, I completely agree. Troublemakers make everything worse for everyone. And I smiled and closed the door. Over the next 4 months, the registrar of contractors investigated the 3 complaints and found 2 of them substantiated. Dale's contractor's license was suspended for 90 days pending corrective action. A 90-day suspension on a 3-truck landscaping operation is not a death blow, but it is a serious wound. He couldn't legally take on new irrigation contracts, had to delay or cancel several jobs, and the incident was added to his public record on the registrar website, which meant anyone who searched for his business would see it. His Google rating dropped to 3.6 during this period, partly because unhappy customers who were on the fence about leaving reviews suddenly found reasons to. I don't know exactly what happened with the IRS tip. I probably never will. They don't notify the person who submitted the report. But roughly 8 months after I submitted it, Dale listed his house for sale. He moved out on a Friday in November. I watched the moving truck from my front window with a cup of coffee in my hand, and I felt something I want to describe accurately, because I think accuracy matters here. It wasn't exactly triumph or glee. It was more like the quiet satisfaction of a correctly solved problem, like when a piece of code finally runs clean after weeks of debugging. Something that was broken had been corrected, and the correction had come from within the system itself. I had simply identified the right inputs. The couple who moved in are lovely. They have a dog named Biscuit, and they bring homemade tamales to the neighborhood holiday party. The woman, Rosa, told me once that she couldn't believe what a great deal they'd gotten on the house. Dale had sold it well below market value, apparently, needing a quick close. I nodded sympathetically and said, sometimes people just need a fresh start somewhere new. If anyone from my street is reading this and puts 2 and 2 together, hi, I'd do it again. One more thing, because people always ask, do I feel guilty? Genuinely, no. Every single thing I did was legal, documented, and in response to real wrongdoing on his part. I didn't invent the IRS tip. I didn't invent the contractor complaints. I didn't invent the parking ordinance. I found the tools that already existed and put them in the hands of people with legitimate reasons to use them. Dale spent 2 years treating his neighbors like obstacles in his personal kingdom, and he had done it for so long that he forgot that some obstacles have engineering degrees and a lot of free time on weekends. I maintain my property to a reasonable standard. My trash cans are placed well within any plausible interpretation of any rule. My oil catch pan is still under the car out of sheer habit. And my mailbox has been empty of handwritten notes for 14 beautiful months.